Fletcher's Solicitors are proud to sponsor the Mama Academy podcast series. We are one of the UK's leading birth injury specialists, trusted by families with the most complex legal cases. We champion better maternity care through every family's story. Fletcher's Solicitors, for every birth, for every baby, for every family. For more information about how we can help, visit www.fletchersolicitors.co.uk.
Hello and welcome back to the Mama Podcast. This episode continues our series exploring the people, conversations, and experiences shaping maternity and neonatal care. Today, we're joined by Michelle Welsh MP, National Maternity Advisor, whose work is helping shape the future of safer maternity care across the UK. Michelle shares her vision for improving outcomes for mothers and babies, discussing the importance of listening to families, supporting maternity professionals, and driving meaningful improvements across the healthcare system. Together, we explore the priorities, challenges, and opportunities that will help create safer births and better experiences for every family.
Well, welcome to this episode of the Mama Podcast. I'm Heidi Eldridge, your host, and the founder and CEO of Mama Academy. And I'm absolutely delighted to have Michelle Welsh with us today, who is an MP. And you've just been appointed the first ever National Maternity Advisor. So would you like to share your story with us, Michelle? Let us know how you've come here and what this moment means to you personally.
So personally, this moment means absolutely everything to me. Just over 6 years ago, I had my son at Nottingham University Hospital Trust, Nottingham City Hospital, and had an horrendous birthing experience which resulted, I was treated horrendously. I was treated with utter disdain, disrespect. I wasn't listened to. I was made very, very ill myself. I ended up having to have an emergency C-section, and this is a really kind of long story short. But my son was born not breathing. Luckily, in the end, he did breathe. My bad treatment didn't end there though. When I went back onto the maternity ward, they were making fun at my inability to breastfeed and how I was struggling. And they didn't help me to reach over to pick Billy up. I had an emergency C-section. They'd done quite a lot of damage to me. They weren't changing my water. It was all just absolutely horrendous. And when I rang the buzzer, they were more interested in ordering pizza than they were coming to me that was clearly in a lot of pain and a lot of distress. And when I left the hospital, they told me that my son was deaf and that they didn't know whether he would have developmental delays or not. And to this day, Billy isn't deaf and he doesn't have developmental delays, although what it has done to me, it means that every parents' evening, obviously, I feel ill. I'm actually physically ill. I'm physically sick. On his birthday, I get up extra early so I can cry in the bathroom because the trauma still hits me, and I don't want him to think that I'm sad on his birthday because he is the most precious thing in the whole wide world. And I suppose it's him really that has got me to this place because of how precious he is and how much I love him. I know that I'm one of the lucky ones because I get to do all that. But lots of women don't. And then I don't know why I made the decision to become a county councillor, but I did. And I was put on a health scrutiny committee. And in 2021, my first ever meeting was up against the most senior people at NUH maternity. And they decided to provide very little information. They were evading questions and they weren't talking to us as what would normally happen when you have medical professionals or someone from the NHS come to us. And so kind of the alarm bells rang for me as I was sat in front of them. So in that meeting, I spoke up about what happened to me and what an awful experience it was, and said, I just need to know that this isn't happening to other people because you haven't presented me with any evidence. You know, as a county councillor, it's our role as the health scrutiny and they were very evasive and really quite rude actually, to us. But this is, every meeting of the council is a public meeting, and there was a local journalist there that picked it up with my story and ran with this story. And before I knew it, I was doing radio interviews. It was in the local newspaper, at the local TV, and then I just started to get hundreds and hundreds of emails from women about their experiences. And it opened the floodgates. And from that moment, I knew I needed to do more. I needed to help more. And there was already, a group of families that had started to campaign on this. They wanted an inquiry. And as I was listening and speaking to more and more families, I was realizing that something does need to be investigated here. What is happening? And then I'd go to the supermarket, and a woman would stop me in a supermarket and say, this is what happened to me at the park. So many times at the park, actually. Filling up with petrol a couple of times as well. Women came over and said, oh, I saw you on the news. Thank you for speaking up, because this happened to me. And then when it becomes, people that you're at the school gates with as well, you realise that this is something huge. And then you read like what happened in Shrewsbury and Telford, and I knew I had to do something about it. And I stood to be the MP for Sherwood Forest, and I knew that as soon as I came into Parliament, that one of my main priorities, as well as obviously serving my constituents the best I can, is that I wanted to help change maternity services. I wanted to give mothers and fathers a voice. I wanted to give unborn babies a voice, because they need help too. And all the amazing organisations that are out there, they needed a voice. And so that's how I came to be kind of the chair of the Maternity All Party Parliamentary Group. And because of that work, the government recognised me and what I was doing.
Well, you're doing a fantastic job, and I just wanted to thank you personally, for being so brave and sharing your story with everybody, but also for, channeling your passion into really helping change maternity services and having a voice for all those families that aren't able to do that. So thank you so much, because what you've set out to do, you are doing, and you're just a fantastic maternity champion for all of us. So thank you so much for that, Michelle. So how has carrying, your lived experience alongside your work chairing the maternity APPG shaped what you believe to be a kinder maternity system? What does that look like?
Kinder maternity system is one that listens to women. So many times we hear that women said, I knew that something was wrong, or I was in an unbelievable amount of pain, but they wouldn't believe me, or my baby was suddenly not moving as it normally does. And I was really worried, but I was dismissed, or I wasn't listened to. And, and in my case, I phoned the hospital 4 times before anyone would admit me into the hospital. And then they didn't admit me into hospital, actually. We just drove there because my waters broke. I was begging the midwife on the phone to check my file, to listen to me. And I'll never forget that she turned around and said to me, you're a first-time mum, so how do you know what you're talking about? You've never been here before. But I knew that there was something wrong. It didn't feel like. So I think it's about listening to women and supporting women. But within that, it comes also giving midwives the time to care as well. And so there are some cultural issues that will certainly come out, I think, in the next few weeks, where women have been treated badly, and there seems to be no rhyme or reason for that, and I'm, a victim of that. But there are also absolutely fantastic midwives working on our department day in and day out that will turn around, that will say, we just don't have the time to care. We have so many kind of patients, women all at one time. And then we have to prioritize, and they just don't have that time to care. And then the other thing, Heidi, which I think I know you've been there before when we've spoken about this, is that kind of relationship with a medical professional that was so important has totally gone. It's like when my mum had me, she had the same midwife all the way through. And so she developed a really lovely relationship with her midwife. But that lovely relationship also meant the midwife knew the family setup, the network, the whether she was due to have a complicated birth, whether there was any language, the culture, the religion, all of those things that midwife knew. So I think a kinder, more compassionate maternity service is actually looking at not just giving time to care, but actually real continuity of care that goes actually beyond the birth as well. I think that's something definitely we should be really, really looking at how we can do that.
Absolutely. And you just mentioned, the pressure that midwives are under. How does the national vision for safer birth sort of connect to the day-to-day experience of the midwife, sort of on the ground floor? What does it mean for them?
I think what it means for them is, I know in the past there's been some data about what is safe for that particular trust or what is, safe for that particular hospital. And I think we need to get back to that point as well. I think we can run the danger of saying it's just about lots and lots more midwives. Actually, what I think we need to create is a modern workforce. What does safer staffing actually look like, and what safer staffing might look like for a rural community might be quite different. For example, what it means for Nottingham City or for Manchester. And so I think while we need to get to the point where we're able to identify what is the safest way to deliver that care, I don't think we're there at the moment by any stretch of the imagination. And that's the big chunk of the work that the government will need to do with the NHS. But not one thing alone is going to solve this issue. And so unless we start talking about safer staffing along with continuity of care and what that looks like after the child's born, and unless we start looking about, okay, so what happens when things do go wrong? Actually, should every woman have a debrief after they're given birth, no matter what happens, so they understand what happened during that birth, they don't have those questions? All of those things, I think we have to see them as a collective way of making a kinder and compassionate. So safer staffing is absolutely a priority. But again, nothing can be done on its own. It has to be done with some other big, bold policies around it.
And talking about changes that need to happen, obviously consistent and ring-fenced funding specifically for maternity services is also really important. What's your vision for how funding needs to change? What would make that possible to have extra funding for maternity services?
I think funding should come in line with the changes that we collectively want to make. We've got 2 reports coming forward. We've got the Donna Rockington review and the Baroness Amos review. Both are huge reports and inquiries. As you know, I've been involved in the Nottingham inquiry for a number of years now. They have to influence. They are a huge amount of research. There cannot be 2 more reports that are left on the shelf. There has to be change, and therefore we have to have a plan. And with that plan, we'll have to become what happens next. And I think the reality is, and if we're all open and honest about this, if we really want to change maternity services, we have to look at the mechanisms of a way we fund our maternity services. Because for far too long, what has happened, and this is again talking to people in NHS trusts of all different levels, is that actually, we've got to get A&E waiting times down, or actually we're trying to, stop corridor care, which of course are really, really, really important. But often that is at the expense of investment in our maternity services. And that is part of one of the issues. And I say this, there's been a societal issue towards childbirth and giving birth for a long, long time, because it happens every single day, and women are giving birth every single day, and women are, expected to carry babies and give birth, and kind of get on with it. They're actually sometimes seen as a second-class health service that doesn't require the amount of support or the amount of influence that we would want it to. So I think for me, the funding has to come because it would be significant, and it would tell something to the country and to the trust. Actually, improving maternity services is really, really important. And with this funding, we expect you to use it for the maternity services. Now, I don't think that's a just come. I think it has to come as part of the plan of how we improve. So if we want to improve it, the funding should come with the improvement as to what we really, really want to happen. What I don't want to happen is money thrown at maternity services without a plan, because we've seen that doesn't work. I don't want to see, I don't want to see a maternity commissioner without a plan. All of those things have got to all come together, because for so long we've been tinkering around the edges and making changes. Some changes that we've seen on paper are absolutely brilliant, but if the rest of the system isn't working, actually they won't improve things for women and babies, and that's what's really, really important. And so we have an opportunity as a government to bring everybody together, families alongside clinicians and organisations and charities and harmed families, all together in the same room, saying, okay, this is what has come out of the inquiry. Now what next? Let's get this plan together and let's fight for the funding that we need.
Absolutely. And you've done such an amazing job to bring so many different people together through the APPG. So like you said, there's been the NHS, there's government, there's families, maternity organisations such as us, for instance. That's a huge coalition to bring together. It's amazing what you've done. What does national oversight of maternity services look like, and why is it taking us so long to get here, for us all to come together and work together as a team?
So, Heidi, I think that's one of the biggest questions that everybody should be asking themselves, because when people say to me, it's not the system that's the problem, or actually those authorities are working really, really well, I would say, well, actually, what kind of system do we have where families have to speak up for 15, 16 years before they get even an inquiry? An inquiry, not the answers to how their baby died or why it happened, to get an inquiry. And how is it that in Nottinghamshire we have over 2,500 families that are on some of the highest categories of what happened to them, and then another 700 families where there was harm, but actually nobody died, but there's still trauma and there's harm? How did we get to that point? Because there are so-called systems and protocols in place, but they're obviously not working. And I just don't buy the fact that we need to tinker round the edges, or actually they're okay and they can stay within the system. For me, if we're going to improve maternity services, everything should be put on the table, and we should actually be able to and I actually believe this, we have to face some uncomfortable truths as well. People have to face those uncomfortable truths, because the reality is there's been a lot of hurt and a lot of trauma caused because systems are failing. And that's the reality. It shouldn't be that, 10 years down the line, 2,500 families have been hugely affected. And by affected, I mean baby loss, mothers died, but also I mean by fighting for answers, people's marriages have broken down, they've lost their careers, very poor mental health. Some have made the decision not to have another child because they feel that the trauma was so bad. The joy of having a child has been ripped away from them. That's what those systems have done. And that's the uncomfortable truth. And some people don't like it being said like that, but that is the uncomfortable truth. The uncomfortable truth is these systems have ultimately failed people. So what are we going to do about it? And actually, this isn't personal. This isn't about individual names or anything like that. This is about creating systems that mean that good midwives can be great midwives, good obstetricians can be great obstetricians, where women are listened to and given safe and compassionate care. Will there be mistakes in the future? Perhaps there will. Will there be times, sadly, when there is baby loss? There will. Birth is complicated. But actually, we can put systems in place when things do go wrong or if things do get bad, where women and families are treated with the compassion that they deserve. And at the moment, for the most part, sadly, that just doesn't happen.
Absolutely. So accountability and national oversight is so important. You know, I'm really passionate about fetal growth restriction and the fact that, you know, we suddenly had these new charts introduced into the UK and they weren't fit for purpose. And yet it took bereaved parents to discover that. They were the ones that had to go away and do all the evidence, all the research, present that to NHS England for them to actually notice and to take them off the shelves. So I think more national oversight of data and registering detection rates for growth restriction and things like that would have a huge difference. Data and transparency obviously only works if the numbers are actually looked at and not just have reports on the shelf, like you say. So how can that be improved as well, do you think?
Well, one of the things that I always find really alarming and baffling, and truly, truly baffling, is the fact that different trusts report different things in different ways. And so it's really, really hard, one, to get a definite kind of national picture as to what happened, because the national picture should be influencing, but also to get that local picture. And for me, this isn't just about holding people to account, it's also about how we make improvements and how we put funding in the right places. For example, there'll be things, perhaps challenges that certain trusts face that other trusts don't. And I think if everyone was reporting in the same way, mandatory national reporting with very, very clear categories, maybe that would be the answer. Maybe then it would be clearer when we're talking about the disparities that we see and the health inequalities and the fact that Black and brown women are more likely to, die during birth, all of those things. Maybe that would give us a better clarity and a better understanding of all of those things. And I'll tell you what else it will avoid. So one of the most frightening things that I found out about Nottingham when I was reading through various board papers and researching it all those years ago was that Nottingham created its own NUH at the time, created its own category, a new category for when babies died. So it could tick the box and then the deaths weren't
Right.
investigated.
That makes sense. Right.
So what kind of system
Yeah.
allows that? Because Heidi, if me and you were talking about that in a cafe with our friends, with our non-maternity, kind of head on with our friends, and you said that to somebody, they'd be like, you
Yeah.
can't,
Absolutely shocked.
no. Yeah, they would be horrified and shocked and say, well, you can't do that. Or you say, well, actually, this person decided actually in this trust, no, they don't report it in the same way. Oh, so I want a comparison of Nottingham and Sheffield. Well, we can make some comparison, but we can't because they don't report that bit. Or they And so I just think it makes it really, really hard to produce a national strategy for maternity when the data's just not where it should be, but also to spot when things go wrong or start going wrong. Like, how do we know when a trust needs extra support or extra provision? There could be an influx of, certain things happening in that area. So actually, they need some extras. How would we know that? But also, how would we know if we'd had another Nottingham?
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's the worrying bit for me, because at the moment, there isn't within the system that would stop another Nottingham.
Mm.
Things could be going on for a long, long time. And the majority of the time, Heidi, and you know this, like after something bad has happened, it's really hard to fight for that. That's really, really hard. It's a hard thing to do. None more so than when you lost a baby, and none more so when a lot of the accounts that I've heard, the women were made to feel like it was their fault.
Mm,
Like,
mm,
oh no, it wasn't anything we did. We're not ticking that box. We're ticking this box. Actually, it's more to do. It's to do with you and your body and how your body reacted to it. I knew of one situation where a woman had to give birth by emergency C-section. She could still feel the pain. So they then had to completely general anaesthetic her, and it was horrendous, most horrendous experience. And she said, "Well, how did that happen? How could I feel that pain? Why did you end up having?" She said, "No, it's because you're fat. You're obese. You're massively overweight. That's why." Now, I actually use the word fat, and I'm a bit like, how how do we get to a system where we're saying that's not okay?
mm,
And actually,
mm.
some of that is by having national data, mandatory national data, actually, where trusts understand we're here to support, we want you to provide safe and compassionate services. But if there is an issue, then we're coming in, then we will be dealing with that. And that's not in a threatening way, that is just could be a supportive way. But without that national data, I struggle to see how we can make progress.
Mm. Well, you've hit the nail on the head by saying consistent and mandatory, and that's what we need. We need everyone reporting in the same way, and banging the drum about growth restriction again. When my son died, I was told it was just one of those things. I had to go away and realise that he was growth restricted. No one told me that, and it's still happening 17 years later. Parents don't understand that their baby was small and wasn't growing properly. And so that's so important, because how can you start learning lessons or looking for answers or even contemplating another pregnancy when you don't know what's happened with that one? It's very, very difficult.
Mm, and Heidi, like you, you having to stand up, not in all credit for you because you've carried on doing that, and there's no doubt that you have changed people's lives for the work that you have done. There's no doubt about that, but it shouldn't have to take that.
Mm.
It should, and that is it, And so you're an incredible person. You've done amazing work, and it's always a pleasure to be around you and have a chat with you and see what you're doing. It's great. But at the same time, neither of us really should be sat here.
No.
Neither of us should be sat here feeling that we have to fight and fight a system that isn't working. And that's the bit that drives me on, because I meet great, fantastic, amazing people who are fighting a battle after the most traumatic event possible, the most traumatic event possible. And I think they're amazing, and I'm in awe of them, and I'm so humbled by them, like I am you, Heidi. But I wish she didn't have to do it.
I
I
know.
wish that me and you weren't sitting here having to do it, because that's the bit that upsets me. And that's the bit that when people tell me it's not systems or that should stay or we shouldn't review that, that's the bit that drives me on, because this is real people having to stand up again and again and again and ask to be heard. Like
Yeah.
it just seems crazy to me.
And it's so hard, it's so frustrating, and it's so hard when you see report after report after inquiry, and you're making a difference. You are making a difference, but there's just so much more to do, and it's so frustrating the amount of times you feel like giving up because you just think the way the system is, and it's so difficult. But I have my little tantrum, a little sulk, and then I brush myself up again, off I go again, because it's so important. When you're so passionate about it, these are people's lives. This is the future of it's future lives and future families, and it's just so important. So we have to keep going, we have to keep going, we have to do it together. We can't do it on our own. We have to
And
do it as a team.
I think that's one of the great things that have come out of all of this, because, you know, we have to kind of face the fact also that maternity is quite a broad church, and there are people that I agree with and there are people that I don't always agree with. But actually, certainly with the maternity APPG, I think one of the most wonderful things about it is there are lots of different people there for different reasons, and sometimes people won't always agree, but actually we treat everyone with respect, because the one thing we do all agree on is that it has to change and it can't stay as it is. There's just not an option to do that. And so sometimes the arguments about what definite policies need to look like, they will be had, and we're all prepared to have those kind of debates and those discussions. But actually, the one thing that we do agree with, which makes us all, I think, a formidable force, is that we all agree one thing, and that's that it has to change. There's no choice in that. It has to change.
Absolutely. You touched upon health inequalities earlier as well. What do you think it's going to take to sort of close the gap in outcomes for Black, Asian, and ethnic minority families? And how can you, in your role, help to drive that forward?
Yes, so I think there's a number of things. There is essentially in some trusts, and I don't want to say all trusts because I don't have enough knowledge on that to say all trusts, although I might be wrong, of a cultural issue. And that's really, really evident, I think, where you are treated differently. And certainly in Nottingham, we have an instance where a woman actually, medical terminology was she found quite difficult and she needed a translator, and they said, no, having a translator is a gold standard of service, so you won't be getting a gold standard of service. There are accounts that have been told me that, because I'm a Black woman, I'm supposed to endure pain more. For example, there's also the issue of there are certain medical issues, including preeclampsia, that will affect certain ethnicities more than others. All of those things that are knowledge out there aren't very recognised. There's some education to go on. There's tackling some of that cultural issues as well. But I think one of the powerful ways that we do it is allowing women to have a kind of advocate that goes through their midwife, which is where that continuity of care takes place and allows for someone to really understand the family, the makeup, who they are, what their culture is, what their religion is, and supports them all the way through it. Again, it's about us facing some of these uncomfortable truths or not, because often we'll talk about it, often we'll discuss it. We can all agree that it's unacceptable, but actually, how do we get to that root cause? And some of that is by saying, we will not accept it. We will not accept it, and we do not accept it. And if you are going to do it, this is what is going to happen. And again, the majority of midwives aren't like that. The majority of obstetricians aren't like that. But when it does happen, we do need accountability. So we need education, we need support, we need the safer staffing, we need continuity of care. But also we need, if this keeps happening, we just won't accept it. It's just not acceptable to treat somebody differently because of the colour of their skin. That's just not acceptable. And I'm sadly, again, it makes me so sad that I'm having to even say this, in this day and age and in this country, that I'm having to say that out loud. And again, I meet so many organisations that are out there doing fantastic work. And I think, we need to reach out to those more as well and capture that great work that they're doing, because there are people doing incredible work.
Absolutely. And through your work at the APPG, again, you've spoken to thousands of families across the country. How do we make sure that, parents' voices stay central to reform?
So I think what the government is doing at the moment is to making sure that the families are on the national task force and expert reference groups. I think they are still there. But I think there's something that every trust can do. I think this is something where every trust can, set up some kind of maybe board where families and clinicians are together. I don't know how that would work for individual trusts, but I think bringing everyone together, and I think the maternity APPG is an absolute kind of really shows actually how it can be done and how many people feel that they're engaged and part of that. Everywhere I go, somebody's saying, how great it is because they feel included. I think that needs to happen. But also there needs to be a mechanism, an official system as well for families, that when things don't get wrong or go wrong, or when they feel that they have unanswered questions, or they need clarity, or they can't remember. So I've met mothers that can't remember what happened to them, but they know it was bad, but they can't quite remember and nobody will tell them. Then I think we need a mechanism for being able to do that. Whereas, like, I could have said or emailed or phoned a number and said, this happened to me. I don't understand. I've asked the trust. I haven't got their answers. What happens next? How do you help me? What happens? That's a gap. That's a huge, huge gap because even if people say there is something there at the moment, there isn't. And if there is supposedly something there, it doesn't work. Otherwise, we wouldn't have seen Shrewsbury, Telford, we wouldn't have seen Leeds, and possibly, and not possibly, but Sussex as well. That the other inquiry, we wouldn't have seen any of that. And Heidi, one of the really sad things as well, which also demonstrates how much the system needs to change. I've spoken to quite a lot of families where the mothers have said, if they'd just told me that in the first place, I wouldn't have had the last 6 years of my life the way it was. Or actually, my marriage wouldn't have broken down. Or actually, I'd still have that career. If they had just sat down with me and gone through with me what had happened, why it happened, and said sorry, actually, I wouldn't be here, wouldn't still be fighting and feeling the way I did. Sometimes I struggle to leave the house because the system at the moment compounds trauma. It makes you feel like, and it makes you question, oh, maybe it was me. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe it is all me. And somebody asked me earlier, and I found this really interesting, and I've never really said this out loud, I suppose, before. But he said, you're fairly articulate and you're able to express yourself and you stand up and fight for others. How does it make you feel as a woman when you spoke up about what happened to you and they didn't listen to you? And I said, do you understand why that is? I said, well, I kind of understand about safe staffing and the fact that there might not have been enough people there to take care of me. I said, but I'll never understand the way in which they treated me and the language they used and the disdain and ignoring me or not telling me what was happening. I will never ever understand that that part of it. And in a way, because I don't understand that, then it's really hard for me to forgive myself. So I still carry an enormous amount of guilt and a little bit of shame that I failed Billy from the start. Because why didn't I speak up? Why didn't I tell that midwife she was wrong and I needed to come in? Because I accepted what a midwife said. And yet on other parts of my life, I've always been able to stand up for people. And I know the thoughts about it. I know what people will say. Well, no, Michelle, there's lots of people like that. There are. But because I don't understand the manner in which they treated me, it's really hard for me to move on. Really hard.
Yeah, that is really, really hard. And you think of all the parents that can't speak up, aren't able to speak up. And the thing is, it's challenging someone with authority, isn't it? Because you think, well, they're the experts, they're the professionals in this field. They know much more about clinical, medical, maternity services than I do. And so you respect them. And actually, it's your way of showing respect to the professionals, I think. And I don't regret things because I think, well, if I was in that situation again, I would have done it exactly the same, because it's always a first. It's always a first time. You've never got that hindsight. You've never got that experience. And obviously what we know now makes us regret it, because obviously if it did happen to us now, we'd react in a completely different way.
And that's what makes me, gives me my determination to keep on fighting, because, what it does prove is that women are incredibly vulnerable when they are giving birth, and that is actually, it's okay to be vulnerable. It doesn't matter how strong you feel you are as a woman or what fights you've taken on in the past, you become very, very vulnerable, because pregnancy and childbirth make you vulnerable, just full stop. So I think that it's hard, isn't it, Heidi? Like, we all have to come to terms with things that have happened in different ways. But what I do know is, from that becomes my determination, to keep on with this and keep working on this, and not to be silenced, and all of those things as well, to keep on talking about this.
Exactly. We're channeling our experience and our trauma into hope and change for future families. And I think that's the best thing that we can do. I feel like this is my purpose. I now have a purpose in life, and that's to help more babies arrive safely. And that's what we can do. And as difficult as it is, we are making a difference. We are. And I do think that where we're at the moment, and the fact that the Amos report is going to come out, there will be recommendations, and then it's our job to champion them and make sure that they're actually put into action.
Exactly, and to keep talking about it, and keep putting it out and about everywhere. One of the things I say to the people that work in my office, I want maternity and birth to be talked about every single week in Parliament in some way or form, because talking about it within as well as outside is really, really important too. The fact that we're regularly having conversations about the state of maternity, but also having those really positive conversations about what will it look like in the future, and what do we want to happen, and what is our priority, I think are really, really important too. But all credit to you, Heidi, and everyone that is working on this to drive that change as well, because what is really evident is the amount of compassionate people there are out there that are trying to drive that change, and are actually driving that change. The compassion and the power that I feel in that room at the APPG is huge, and that's what we have to embrace, and that's what we have to carry on doing.
Absolutely. So what's your hope for the future about building a better maternity system?
My hope for the future is that women can go into childbirth, have the continuity of care that they so desperately need, but have that compassionate and safe care. And the way we do that is by changing systems, but working collectively together. This cannot be done in isolation, with the NHS England working on its own, or the government working on it. This comes by bringing everybody together. But the goal for any government, and this government, and going forward would be that actually we have safe, compassionate care, and that every woman walks out of that hospital with the answers that she needs. The answers that she needs to for her own health and her own mental health, and going forward. To deny anybody answers is probably the coolest thing that I've come across in all of my work.
And that's why, parents tend to go down the legal route and the clinical negligence route, because they want answers and they want an apology. It's not compensation that they want. They just literally want answers, and they want lessons to be learned so it doesn't happen again for another family. And that's so important. And like you say, we need that closure so that we can then start the healing journey. Otherwise it never happens.
Exactly. And sometimes you hear some really bad comments about families and compensation, and they want this and they want that. I haven't spoken to a single family that has said that to me, nor have I picked it up from any family when I've spoken
No.
to them. It all comes from the fact that they have said, we were told this was happened, that's not what happened, or that was not the sequence of event, or actually I didn't even see that person in the room,
Yeah.
or actually they're just not telling me. They're just not telling me what happened. And that is where that balance of accountability comes in, because we also need to change the system so that when things go wrong, clinicians aren't frightened,
Yes,
that they
absolutely.
have the ability, that we haven't, and if they still hold it back after having that, then there is a real issue. But we need them to have the ability to say, this is what happened, why it happened. And then there is a thorough, fair, and transparent investigation as to what happened. But they need to know that they're going to get a fair, transparent, investigation around it, and that families are able to get those answers. And this should be done as quickly as possible for everybody,
Yeah.
because we want people to be great midwives and obstetricians. We want them to keep coming forward. We want great, compassionate people working in our maternity services, but the system equally fails the good, great midwives and obstetricians too. And so getting that balance is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. If they're frightened of, whistleblowing, they don't feel safe, and then there's no transparency, you're never going to get the truth, and then you're never going to be able to learn from it. So that's truly important.
Yeah.
Well, this is actually the final episode of this particular Mama podcast series. For every midwife, policymaker, family that's listening today, what would you like them to take away from this conversation? If there's one thing they could learn and act on, what would it be?
Well, firstly, I'd like to say thank you for all of the great work that they are doing. I understand that this is incredibly difficult. I also understand that sometimes it feels, as particularly midwives, that the world is against them. That's certainly not the case with me. I want them to be able to be great. I want them to find and develop a system where actually they can be the greatest, and they can care with confidence and give the compassionate care that they want. So what I'd like them to take away is to know that there are so many people advocating for everybody on this, and that if they keep with us and keep joining with us and keep supporting us and keep having those conversations, that we will get that change. But we have actually a collective responsibility on this, because I don't think we get effective change unless we all work together. And again, sometimes that'll be having some uncomfortable conversations, but actually we have to work together. So everyone has a role in this. Absolutely everybody has a role with it. But also thank you, because I know it's not easy to keep speaking out and keep fighting, but we are all here together, doing it together. And as long as I'm around, whatever role it will be, I will be fighting for maternity services and making sure that your voices are heard.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you for everything that you're doing, for future families. From myself personally as well, it's a huge thanks. You're making a massive difference, and it's an honour to be working alongside you.
And you.
Fletcher Solicitors are proud to support the Mama Academy by sponsoring this podcast series. At Fletcher Solicitors, we champion better maternity care. For every birth, for every baby, for every family.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, share it with a friend or colleague. Make sure you follow us so you don't miss out on our next episode. If you'd like to support our work by fundraising or volunteering, please email contact@mamaacademy.org.uk. For more information on pregnancy and maternity services, please visit our website at www.mamaacademy.org.uk. We're also on all of your favourite social media channels. See you next time!